And it's very interesting to me that the Guthrie family is now specifically putting the January 11th date in their new statement. And trust me, this statement was definitely approved by the FBI and by investigators, and maybe even crafted in part by investigators. So there is nothing in here that's just sort of slipping in by mistake. I mean, this is all, I would imagine, very carefully curated, just like Savannah's videos.
In some quiet pockets, anonymity simply does not exist. Locals track every passing sedan, every unfamiliar gate, and every off-season moving van with a jeweler's eye for detail, fueling whispers and suspicion at every single shared mailbox. The Catalina Foothills fits that mold. Home to families anchored to the same soil for decades. They recognize every dog, every routine, and exactly which porch lamps flicker out by 9 in the evening. A specific engine note idling in a specific driveway at a specific hour acts as a local heartbeat. They know the symphony of a normal night. Yet somehow, in the weeks before Nancy Guthrie was stolen from her home in the darkness, a predator drifted through these streets repeatedly, evading every digital eye meant to guard the community, slipping past without a single challenge or a high-definition frame of his face for the local authorities. How does a predator remain invisible in a place where every single window has a witness? How does one dissect a home's defenses, map the utilities, track the inhabitants, and execute an abduction at 2 in the morning? Despite a sea of ring sensors and veteran locals who miss nothing, he vanished without a trace. A cold reality that demands a definitive answer. Now, thanks to fresh reporting from Brian Enton at News Nation, the Bureau might finally have the answer. This wasn't some random drifter who arrived cold and stumbled into a stroke of luck after one visit. According to the latest lead and watchful neighbors, the threat was hiding in plain sight, watching from the house next door before anyone knew to look. To solve this, we must examine the victim, Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman at the center of it. The mother of Savannah Guthrie from the Today Show. She lived a life of faith, never missing her Sunday morning service. On the final night of January, she shared a meal with her daughter Annie and her son-in-law, Tomaso Chioni. Tomaso pulled away from her curb at approximately 9:48 that evening, the final documented moment she was seen. By the following morning, her empty chair at church sparked a panic that led her family straight to her door. Her essentials phone, keys, wallet remained untouched inside, but the porch bore the dark, chilling evidence of a struggle. 51 days later, the case remains cold, lacking even a single named suspect in the files. Hours after her return, a clinical operation refined over several weeks was put into motion with terrifying speed. The Nest camera guarding the front entrance had been physically compromised, silenced by a knowledgeable hand. Lacking a cloud backup, the device itself was later found to be completely missing. Federal agents worked with Google to claw back data, yielding the only real visual glimpse of the intruder. A figure in a mask, gloves, and a tactical holster stood at the door of a grandmother's home. Investigators and sources at Fox News Digital suggest these snapshots were likely captured during entirely different visits to the home. One frame captures the suspect weighted down by a backpack and sidearm. Another shows him unburdened, standing differently, a detail pointing toward a calculated rehearsal before the actual strike on the house. Sheriff Chris Nanos dismissed these theories as guesswork, citing the lack of verified timestamps on the doorbell images. Yet the FBI is leaning into the suspicion that the suspect scouted that property long before February 1st as a priority. This theory drives the investigation, because if he was there before, it shifts the entire logic of the crime. He needed a staging ground nearby where an unfamiliar vehicle should have stood out to the neighbors. 2 specific dates have now become the center of gravity for the detectives working this strange case. The authorities aren't tipping their hand as to why these moments matter, but those dates keep echoing in interviews with neighbors and in the Guthrie family's increasingly public and desperate calls for help. These dates hold weight, and the digital evidence surrounding them demands a much closer, more critical look. January 11th and January 24th, 2026, both Saturdays, and both critical windows into the suspect's movements. Brian Enton verified these focus areas after speaking with a local resident named Laura on the ground. Agents spent hours inside her home, dissecting her private security feeds from those 2 specific weekend dates, rather than the actual night the abduction took place. They were hunting for something specific, reviewing the files in silence before leaving without offering a single word of explanation. Enton pointed out a pattern that cannot be ignored: the surgical precision of these recurring weekend visits. The 11th and the 24th, both days of rest for most, but clearly work days for whoever was stalking Nancy Guthrie's home. A neighbor noted the intense focus on that final Saturday before the disappearance, a detail that feels far too deliberate. It points to the weekends. January 11th was a Sunday, while January 24th was a Saturday. Nancy Guthrie vanished in the early hours of Sunday, February 1st. To understand why, you have to look at how a place like the Catalina Foothills functions on a Saturday. Monday through Friday follows a set script: commuters, deliveries, and contractors. But when Saturday hits, that predictable rhythm completely breaks. Certain streets fall silent at odd hours, driveways stay full, and the usual sidewalk activity takes a sharp, suspicious turn. For someone running surveillance, trying to map out a neighborhood's pulse, a Saturday provides a completely different blueprint than a Tuesday morning. It reveals who stays in, who heads out, and exactly how deep the silence goes during the day and through the night. The Bureau flagged those weekend dates for a specific reason. Early on, federal agents made a data request that spoke volumes. They told residents to hand over every second of security footage dating all the way back to January 1st. Not just the night she was taken, or even the 10 days prior, but January 1st, 31 days before Nancy Guthrie was gone. That is an investigative team tipping their hand. It suggests they believe this wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a long-planned operation. They suspect the camera records hold a digital trail of stalking that predates anything they have officially admitted to the public. This past week, the Guthrie family broke their silence with a statement that pointedly highlighted January 11th as a critical date. They urged neighbors to dig through their memories and digital archives for that exact time frame. In cases like this, dates are never random. That date is there because the FBI wants it there. January 11th is a primary focal point of the entire manhunt. It is highly calculated that the Guthries are now explicitly tethering their plea to that specific Saturday in mid-January. Make no mistake, that message was vetted, if not partially ghostwritten, by federal investigators to serve a purpose. Nothing in that text is a slip of the tongue. Every word is as precision-engineered as the family's previous videos were. The repetition of Saturdays like January 24th reveals a pattern we must examine. Those 2 weekends tell a chilling story. Combined with the evidence being processed, it shows that the perpetrator didn't just show up on February 1st. They had been scouting those hills for weeks. The trail leads to a single question: where were they watching from? Consider what longtime resident Aldine Meister witnessed near her home. Having spent 30 years in the Catalina Foothills, she possesses an instinctual map of the area that only decades of residency can build. She knows every morning walker, every dog on a leash, and exactly which vehicle belongs in which driveway at any hour. She doesn't have to guess if a person is a stranger. She can feel the discrepancy in her gut without thinking. After 3 decades, the neighborhood's heartbeat is her own. Any irregularity registers. 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared, right in that suspicious January window, Aldine looked out her bathroom window and saw a shadow, a man she didn't recognize near the intersection. She shared her account with major news outlets, describing a figure who didn't fit the local mold at all. He was younger than the typical crowd and wasn't there for a workout. He moved with a slow, heavy intent. When he reached the road leading to Nancy's, he stopped and stared. His hat was pulled low, masking his identity. He just didn't belong, she told reporters, struggling to define the quiet dread that gripped her in that moment. It was the raw friction of pattern recognition, firing off the kind of intuition earned over 30 years in one spot. The scenery was her life's backdrop, but this man was a glitch in the frame she knew by heart. He was a ghost who appeared once and never returned to those streets again after that day. He surfaced, scouted the turnoff, and vanished. After the kidnapping, she took her fear straight to the Bureau. When agents started asking about January 11th, her memory snapped into place. The timeline was a perfect match for her sighting. It happened right after she'd hosted guests on the 8th, roughly 14 days before the nightmare began. Her own cameras missed him, but her testimony was vivid. The investigators didn't just listen. They took her very seriously. I was looking through the window and saw this guy with a low-slung hat. She recalled of the unsettling encounter. He was hunched over, dressed in street clothes rather than hiking gear, a red flag in a neighborhood of active residents. But her story goes deeper, because she had been sounding the alarm on a different front for several weeks. She was fixated on a nearby house that had recently been vacated. She told investigators, "The people next door moved out. Check that house." She saw the void and knew it was a vulnerability. She kept pushing the authorities to look into it. 7 weeks into this nightmare, the FBI is finally investigating the very property she flagged from the start. "My neighbors just left, and that house has been sitting empty," she insisted. No one else seemed to notice the danger. Before we uncover what was found inside that empty house, we have to look at the blackout on February 1st. When you analyze the 49-minute window where the tech failed, the vacant house theory becomes a tactical certainty. The feed went dead. Multiple residents discovered that their security footage from the night Nancy vanished had been wiped clean. This wasn't some technical glitch or a hardware crash. The footage had vanished. Flagged as inaccessible, the moment investigators tried to review the timeline. Officials started grilling locals about strange internet outages, starting around February 1st. Those pointed questions are still being asked today. Federal agents are currently scrutinizing a mangled utility box nearby, hunting for signs of sabotage that might have triggered a digital blackout across the entire street. While authorities haven't officially declared it a case of intentional sabotage, the forensic deep dive into the hardware remains a top priority. The Bureau doesn't burn through manpower on a random power box, unless they have a lead. Now, weigh that suspicion against the cold, hard timeline. The primary entrance camera cut out at exactly 1:47 a.m. by 2:12 a.m. Another sensor on the property tripped, detecting a presence but failing to capture a single frame. Then, at 2:28 a.m., the connection to her heart monitor app flatlined. 8 minutes later, a Ring camera 2.5 miles away caught a vehicle speeding past. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that his team is tracking that specific car, though its identity remains classified. That is a 49-minute gap. Within that narrow window, Nancy Guthrie was snatched from her home while every security measure she owned suffered a simultaneous catastrophic failure. The signals just died. Every digital shield, from the porch cameras to the pacemaker tracking her pulse, suddenly went pitch black. During those 49 minutes of darkness, former FBI agent Moren O'Connell studied the blood spatters on the porch and concluded Nancy was taken by force. The crimson trail was unbroken, she noted, lacking the telltale gaps caused by a person's footsteps. Someone walking would have stepped through that blood. She stated bluntly that the victim didn't walk out on her own. She was likely carried away by a pair of abductors. The evidence suggests she was moved while completely helpless, her head hanging in a position that let the blood drip straight to the ground. Neighbor Laura Gargano reached a similar conclusion using simple logic. She owns a heavy security gate, identical to the one at the Guthrie residence. Her take was direct. If that security gate is locked, nobody is forcing their way through it. Breaking in through the front is virtually impossible. This means the mystery man caught on the doorbell feed wasn't trying to smash his way inside the house. He was likely stationed there for a darker purpose, waiting for accomplices to hand Nancy over once they brought her to the exit. Manhandling an unwilling or unconscious person is an immense physical task. The idea that one lone individual could carry a 150-pound woman is absurd. It required a minimum of 2 people, a surgical team with a lookout at the door, and a driver ready to disappear into the night. That kind of precision isn't improvised on the fly. It is the result of meticulous planning, rehearsals, and weeks of stalking from the shadows. The FBI resurfaced around March 17, 2026, exactly 45 days after Nancy Guthrie was kidnapped. Their return to the Catalina Foothills wasn't a standard patrol or a courtesy check-in with the local residents. They were hunting for answers regarding a specific house, asking neighbors for granular details about the previous tenants and their sudden departure. Investigative reporter Brian Enton broke the story after verifying the Bureau's movements through his high-level confidential sources. Enton reported that federal agents had spent the last 24 hours swarming the neighborhood, circling back to houses they had already visited. The most chilling detail was a specific neighbor who moved out just before the disappearance. The FBI is now obsessed with that empty house. The phrasing here is critical. Enton clarified that while agents aren't labeling that house a crime scene, they are pulling hard on that specific thread. He emphasized that the inquiry doesn't mean the house is directly linked to the snatching. But the FBI's curiosity is undeniably piqued. The facts are clear. The Bureau went back, targeted specific homes, and is now relentlessly digging into the history of one particular property. This isn't a random lead. It is a calculated investigative pivot, a specific direction they are pursuing with intense focus. Nearly 2 months into a kidnapping with no named suspect, this level of renewed interest in a single location carries massive weight. Investigators don't double back 45 days later to grill neighbors about one specific house unless the evidence is screaming at them to do so. This isn't a desperate stab in the dark. It's a targeted hunt. Meanwhile, a second line of inquiry is unfolding regarding local construction. The FBI has demanded the real names of every single laborer and contractor on nearby sites. They aren't looking for companies. They want individuals. A neighbor confirmed that agents approached a friend with a home under renovation, demanding a comprehensive list of everyone who had set foot on site. That demand for specific names suggests they are building a database to cross-reference against a known person of interest. To grasp why this specific property is so important to the FBI, one must understand the tactical role of a staging site. In the world of high-stakes abductions, a nearby base of operations is the difference between a botched job and a clean getaway. Bob Criggier, a veteran SWAT commander from the local sheriff's department, knows exactly how these professional operations are structured. He analyzed the vacant house with the cold eye of a tactician who has planned these types of maneuvers himself. Criggier noted that such a property would serve as the perfect home base, providing the suspects with a safe zone right under everyone's noses. He detailed the operational advantage a nearby house offers a level of surveillance and security that a simple drive-by can never provide. It gives the kidnappers a legitimate excuse to haunt the area for weeks, watching Nancy's every move without ever sounding the alarm. You aren't a stranger if you appear at the same corner twice in 21 days. You're a local. You belong there. The neighborhood's very social fabric becomes your tactical mask. Criggier detailed what that vantage point reveals every arrival, every departure, and the specific timing of each movement, mapping when lamps flicker or engines cut out, identifying when rooms go dark, specifically tracking every move in NY's daily routine, monitoring her return from dinner, noting the glow at 9 in the evening versus the stillness at midnight. You can't map such intimate habits in one day. It requires weeks of hovering nearby to turn guesses into reliable intelligence. Then Criggier dropped the specific detail that bridges the gap to those sudden security camera blackouts. He suggested an empty house, tucked away from prying eyes, could hide high-tech monitoring gear instead of just someone watching from a window. Stealthy sensors hidden within the walls or around the yard, capturing everything while remaining completely undetected by the public. Sitting there, you could chart every wireless signal and power hub that keeps the local security systems and smart alarms running. With that blueprint in hand, killing the signal becomes a simple matter of timing it to your strike zone. Criggier had a message for those losing patience with how slowly this whole thing seems to be moving. Believe it or not, fresh leads emerge constantly. A local might recall a strange sound that they initially dismissed as nothing. This isn't just hollow encouragement. This comes from a veteran who understands that a tiny footnote in week 1 becomes pivotal by week 7. The puzzle pieces are clicking together. The vehicle had vanished. Having spent years in the Catalina Foothills, Laura Gargano senses the slightest shift in her neighborhood's natural equilibrium. Morning echoes and evening shadows are familiar to her, as are the cars usually parked nearby. She opened up to Brian Enton for a deep interview. She has been a key ally for the feds, handing over massive amounts of her personal security data and reviewing tapes for January 11th and 24th. Federal agents have knocked on her door 3 times already, finding her to be an incredibly sharp and helpful witness every single time. It was Laura who caught the anomaly around February 1st. A short-term rental just down the road didn't look right anymore. She had mentally noted the people living there, not through active spying, but simply as part of her daily scenery. She recognized the signs of life at that house, but right as Nancy vanished, That entire presence just evaporated into thin air. The missing car gave it away. In a quiet suburb, silence isn't a scream. It's just an empty slab of concrete where a sedan used to sit. Timed porch lights stayed dark. The person who had become a fixture of the block's visual routine had simply ceased to exist there. Laura recounted her reaction with the driveway empty. She assumed the tenants had cleared out a few days prior. She figured it was likely trivial but decided to alert them anyway, pointing out that the recent occupants had suddenly bolted. She checked with others on the block, who echoed her suspicion. The trucks had vanished, leaving the house completely shrouded in shadows. Once the reality of Nancy's abduction settled over the cul-de-sac, she finally picked up the phone to report it. Let's look at the official record, because there is a discrepancy that demands closer scrutiny. Brian Enton's field sources indicated that the mysterious tenant actually packed up and left prior to Nancy going missing. That timing is crucial before. Laura's story about the empty driveway fits perfectly within that specific window. Yet, investigator Dave Mack reported elsewhere that a nearby resident fled the scene right after the snatching occurred. Whether they are looking at the same house from separate angles or reflect conflicting memories of a single event is a detail that detectives are currently working to pin down. One thing is certain, the Bureau is drilling down on this, and several locals reported the same anomaly without ever talking to one another. Aldine Meister had been sounding this exact same alarm on her own for weeks. She insisted that the people next door had disappeared and pleaded with the police to sweep that specific residence. 2 residents, 1 house, and 0 communication between them before they both reported it. Now federal agents are on site. Laura also put words to the thick layer of dread currently suffocating the community. She confronted Enton with a level of bluntness you rarely see from a witness. She admitted she felt genuinely unsafe. Her fear stems from the sheriff calling this targeted while refusing to explain the logic behind it. She openly questioned what made her a target. Was it money? Was she chosen? Because she seemed like easy prey. A woman on her own, an older victim. She just needed to know if she or anyone else on the block was next. Learning that detectives expect the culprit to hit another house did nothing to calm her shattered nerves. Seeking the reason for that targeted label brings the focus back to that nearby house. Selecting a specific victim like Nancy requires the kind of intimate stalking that only a close-range vantage point can provide. That main entrance. Laura Gargano provided a breakdown of the front door that stands as the most technically sharp insight any witness has offered yet. And it explains exactly why having a nearby base of operations wasn't a choice, it was a requirement. Her own house features a heavy-duty security gate, identical to the barrier installed at NY's residence. Leveraging that personal experience, she gave Enton an absolutely definitive statement on the matter. With a fortified gate like that protecting the entrance, forced entry is off the table. You just can't breach it. Implying the masked figure recorded on the doorbell camera, wearing gloves and carrying a weapon while messing with the lens at dawn, wasn't trying to break in. He was waiting to take Nancy once she was delivered to him. This suggests a calculated, multi-person job. Someone entered through a separate, unguarded point, moved through the house, and steered Nancy toward that front exit. That guy outside was just the lookout and muscle. Once the door opened from the inside, he helped pull her away. One person didn't do this alone. This was a crew. And a crew functions on a level of synchronization that starts weeks before the actual strike. They needed the floor plans, the entry vulnerabilities, and the perfect timing. You don't get that kind of intel without being physically close for a while. That staging site is the key. Now consider the names. The deep dive into construction workers is the second lead the FBI pursued upon returning. It circles back to the core mystery haunting this case, who possessed a valid reason to be wandering the Catalina Foothills back in January, and who turned that validity into a disguise. Several properties in that neighborhood are currently undergoing major renovations or being built from scratch. That brings in a flood of contractors, day laborers, and inspectors, every one of them having a paper trail justifying their presence on those quiet streets. They can loiter in driveways or patrol sidewalks without raising any red flags for someone like Aldine Meister. Despite her 30 years of watching these blocks, guys with tool belts and white vans just blend in. You can haunt those streets for days and remain completely unseen by simply looking like you're on the clock. The Bureau didn't just want business licenses or generic permits. They demanded specific names for every single laborer on site before February 1st. A neighbor of NY mentioned to Enton that a close friend with a nearby building project was grilled by agents to hand over a comprehensive roster of every person who had set foot on her property. They wanted specific identities, not just the firm's name. As former agent Steve Moore explained to Enton, this move signals progress, not a desperate scramble. In his view, the working theory from day one has always pointed toward a highly targeted strike rather than a random act. Collecting those worker IDs allows them to map out everyone present during the scouting phase and cross-reference them with surveillance from those specific Saturdays in January. If a guy on a payroll list shows up on a camera nowhere near his assigned work site, that's more than a coincidence. It's a smoking gun. That's the exact type of overlap this federal probe is hunting for. Now, consider the logistics from the mindset of the person who orchestrated this. You have to scout the area repeatedly without looking like a suspicious loiterer on camera. Using a construction job as a front is a brilliantly simple tactic. You aren't some creep circling the block twice in 3 weeks. You're just a guy in a hard hat. You fit in. Nobody's gut instinct warns them. You can scout, exit, and return without a second thought from the locals, unless the Bureau grabs every name and vets them against the tapes from January 11th and 24th. That is likely exactly what's unfolding. This required serious, calculated foresight. Former supervisory agent Jason Pack provided the sharpest perspective on the evidence we've been piecing together throughout this investigation. Talking to Fox News Digital, he weighed in on the reveal that those doorbell clips might capture the suspects scouting the place weeks before the kidnapping. Jason Pack linked that detail to the broader narrative. He stated this bears the signature of someone who calculated every move before acting. He labeled those earlier trips and the precise timing as proof of a sophisticated, high-level operation. He also touched on a point with massive legal implications. The sheer level of preparation and foresight significantly ramps up the potential criminal charges. If they can prove this was systematically mapped out for weeks, it's not just an abduction. It becomes a kidnapping defined by documented, cold-blooded intent. That shifts the legal landscape for future arrests. The feds aren't just hunting for Nancy Guthrie's abductor. They're building a case based on preparation. They're tracking when the plot started, the number of dry runs, and exactly what kind of intel was harvested, and by which specific hands. Finding a base of operations right next to the victim's house tightens the noose on that timeline in a way that almost nothing else can. It explains those January scouting dates and why they knew where every camera was pointing. It sheds light on how they mapped the local utilities and why a stranger could linger there repeatedly without ever looking like an intruder. He had a cover story. He was living right there. However, Steve Moore provided a different angle that we need to consider in this puzzle. He told Enton he doubts the people behind this are any kind of high-level criminal masterminds. The fact that Nancy is still missing might just be due to bureaucracy and dumb luck on the suspect's part, rather than some flawless master plan. As he put it, they didn't appear particularly skilled. Yet, Moore's take doesn't necessarily clash with Jason Pack's. A crew can spend a month planning but still fumble the execution. They can still leave behind a trail of DNA and blood. They couldn't have predicted a neighbor would spot a vacant driveway, pick up the phone, and steer the feds toward a house they hadn't even considered. For the task force, IQ scores don't matter. What matters is their movement and their location in those weeks leading up to February 1st. The puzzle is coming together. Here is the reality of the situation. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old and has been missing for 51 days. Her life depends on medication she no longer has access to. We have no verified sightings, no official suspects, and no clear motive. Even a $1.22 million reward has failed to crack the silence surrounding her disappearance. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has shifted massive resources into this hunt. While the FBI's Phoenix office is running a full-scale operation, just this past week, detectives returned to the Catalina Foothills, focusing their interrogation on one specific piece of property. A disturbing pattern is emerging. Weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished, a person or a coordinated group flagged her as a specific target. Authorities haven't said why she was chosen, but once she was on their radar, she was watched with clinical precision. This wasn't a random act. It required someone stalking her movements over a significant and calculated period of time. Saturday, January 11th, 3 weeks before she vanished. Police believe a critical event occurred that day and are scouring Laura Gargano's security feeds for answers. They questioned Aldine Meister extensively about that morning. Multiple neighbors were told to review their footage, a request echoed by the Guthrie family's desperate public plea. Then there is Saturday, January 24th, 8 days before the abduction. This second window of targeted surveillance suggests the kidnappers were finalizing their logistics. Both Saturdays are red flags, marking a reconnaissance period that federal agents are now meticulously dissecting from the finish line backward. During that January timeframe, a man wearing a low hat was seen prowling the intersection near Nancy's residence. He walked with a slow, deliberate gaze at her street. Aldine Meister, who has lived there for 30 years, noted he was a complete stranger who hasn't been seen since. He appeared. He scouted. And then he vanished. If Bob Criggier's theory is correct, that a nearby vacant rental was used as a staging base, then that man had a hidden place to retreat to. He wasn't staying in some distant hotel or driving out of town. He was likely hiding in a house right inside the neighborhood perimeter. He had a vantage point from which to monitor when her lights went dark and when her car left, studying the rhythm until he was ready to strike. On February 1st, shortly before 1:47 in the morning, the plan was executed. Connectivity failed. The cameras died. Her doorbell cut out. Motion was sensed at 2:12, but never recorded. Her pacemaker stopped transmitting at 2:28. By 2:36, a vehicle was seen moving through the shadows 2.5 miles away. This week, the Guthrie family reached out to the entire Tucson community with a heavy heart and a specific request. They are urging everyone in southern Arizona to search their memories and re-examine any old security footage they might have saved. They want people to check their text history, personal journals, or any odd observations from January 11th, January 24th, or the early hours of February 1st. The family believes a member of the public might hold a piece of evidence that seems trivial, but is actually the key to the case. Every detail matters right now. This isn't just a family reaching for straws in the wind. This is a calculated message from investigators that the solution is likely trapped in someone's unexamined memory or an overlooked digital file. It could be a car missing from a driveway that Laura Gargano noticed on a quiet morning before anyone realized how much that observation was worth. As Bob Criggier pointed out, fresh leads can emerge from nothing. Someone nearby might have seen a detail they dismissed, which could ultimately unravel the entire mystery. 7 weeks later. The trail isn't cold, it's narrowing. The FBI is back in that neighborhood, asking pointed questions about that house and specific names to neighbors like Laura and Aldine. This is the biggest breakthrough in weeks. They have identified his base of operations. The threat was right next door the whole time. Now the hunt is on for his destination, crossing contractor lists with camera frames and linking Aldine's observations to a name. Once someone's memory finally clicks, the path will lead straight back to that house, that driveway, and the car that disappeared into the night. This case won't be solved by a miracle, but by the slow buildup of facts that people like Laura and Aldine are refusing to let go of. If you have information regarding Nancy Guthrie, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Visit tips.fbi.gov or contact the Pima County Sheriff at 520-3514-90. There is a $1.22 million reward. Someone knows the truth. We will return tomorrow with more updates. The shield of the human spirit. We often believe that a high-tech deadbolt and a glowing security camera are enough to keep the shadows at bay. But in the silent corridors of the Catalina Foothills, we learned a chilling truth. Technology has a heartbeat that can be silenced. When the ring sensors went black and the digital eyes failed, the only thing that remained was the jeweler's eye of a neighbor, the intuition that senses when a stranger's gait doesn't match the rhythm of the street. The tragedy of Nancy Guthrie teaches us that our greatest security system isn't mounted on a wall. It lives in our hearts. A predator can map a utility box or jam a signal, but they cannot bypass a community that truly sees one another. The lesson: never ignore the glitch in the frame. Notice the empty driveway, the flickering porch lamp, and the silent house next door. We must look beyond our own fences to protect the vulnerable among us. In a world of digital ghosts, be the witness at the window. Because we aren't just residents sharing the same soil, we are our brothers and our grandmothers. Keepers.